Imagine being handed a throne, only to realize there's a traitor in your castle. And worse, your own mother helped him inside the gates. This isn't just a power struggle, it's a family war where the king wasn't done fighting just yet. They told me I was too young. Too emotional. Too soft to lead. But none of them said that when I was handed the keys to a $120 million tech empire. No. The whispers didn't start until someone else decided they deserved what wasn't theirs. Imagine this, you walk into your family's company, the company your grandfather built from scratch, the company you were raised in, and the front desk security tells you, sorry, you're not authorized to enter. Your ID badge doesn't work. Your office is locked. You check your phone, and there's an internal memo with a new CEO listed. It's not you. It's your stepdad. The man who married your mother 6 months ago. A man who's never written a single line of code, never sat through a board meeting, never even understood what the company actually does. But there he is, smiling in your father's old chair like he owns the place. And your mother? She's backing him. The same woman who cried when your grandfather announced he was retiring. The same woman who hugged you at your birthday party, the day your grandfather publicly named you his successor. And now, she's standing beside the man trying to erase you from your own legacy. They didn't just lock me out of a building. They tried to lock me out of my birthright. Out of my future. Out of everything I've spent my entire life preparing for. So no, I'm not going to stay quiet. I'm not going to sit this one out, while a liar manipulates my family and tries to sell off everything my grandfather built. I'm Avery Morgan. I'm 23 years old. And if you think I'm going down without a fight, you clearly have no idea who raised me. This is how a tech heiress got betrayed by her own family, and how she took everything back. My story didn't start with betrayal. It started with love, the kind of steady, unconditional love most kids only dream about. My father died in a motorcycle accident when I was 7. One sharp turn, one drunk driver, and suddenly everything we knew was gone. My mom, Linda, was devastated. At first, she barely spoke. She moved through the house like a ghost. I remember sitting on the staircase, knees pulled to my chest, just watching her stare blankly out the window for hours. But while grief pulled her under, someone else stepped forward. Henry Morgan, my grandfather, my dad's father, became the rock of our broken home. He picked me up from school. He helped with science fair projects. He packed my lunch when mom forgot. He never blamed her for falling apart. At least, not out loud. It's not her fault, he'd say, gently wiping my tears. But it's not your burden to carry either, Avery. Grandpa Henry wasn't just my guardian. He was a giant in the tech world. He founded Morgan Systems out of his garage in the early 80s, back when computers were the size of refrigerators and no one thought a self-taught engineer from Austin could take on Silicon Valley. But he did. By the time I was born, Morgan Systems had government contracts, defense deals, and a reputation for being quietly powerful. But to me, it was just the place where Grandpa worked, and where I got to tag along in the summers. While other kids were running lemonade stands or working at the mall, I was shadowing department heads at product development meetings. By 16, I was doing market research projects for fun. By 18, I was sitting quietly in on confidential briefings, taking notes no one expected me to understand, until I did. Grandpa never pushed me toward the company. He never called it my destiny. But when I told him I wanted to major in business and computer science at Rice, he smiled wider than I'd ever seen. You've got your dad's brain and your grandmother's fire, he told me. That combination's rare and dangerous. My mother? She didn't say much about my interest in the business. She was distracted. After my father's death, she remarried twice. The second divorce ended when she caught him messaging a 22-year-old bartender. Linda was beautiful, tall, elegant, always polished, and she knew it. But she had a weakness for charming men with confident voices and vague careers. The kind that looked great in photos but never stayed around long enough to unpack a suitcase. When Ethan Caldwell entered our lives, I thought he was just another passing face. He showed up at a Sunday brunch, dressed in a linen shirt that screamed effortless wealth, calling my grandfather, sir, and complimenting our garden like he'd studied our property online before arriving. He told us he used to work in strategic growth at a competitor. Grandpa Henry's eyes narrowed before the sentence even finished. I've met men like him before, he told me later that evening. Polished on the outside, hollow underneath. Still, Mom was smitten. And when she was smitten, she stopped listening. To anyone. At first, Ethan Caldwell played his part perfectly. He laughed at Grandpa's old stories. He helped my mom organize charity luncheons she didn't care about just to impress her social circle. He complimented everyone, too much. The kind of man who never forgot a name, never missed a birthday, and never said a sentence without calculating how it would land. But you can only wear a mask for so long. Ethan started showing up at Morgan Systems events, even when he wasn't invited. He'd introduce himself to senior staff like he was already part of the executive team. I'm just here supporting Linda and Avery, he'd say with that well-rehearsed humility. But he never asked about us. He only asked about the company. Who's your top R&D lead these days? What's your current burn rate on AI initiatives? Are you planning to expand internationally? At a holiday gala, I caught him in the corner with 2 board members, nursing a scotch and talking like he'd sat in on every quarterly report for the last 5 years. When I walked over, the conversation died instantly. It didn't take long for the staff to start asking questions. Who is this guy? Why does he have access to the executive floor? Did your mom really marry him, or is this a PR stunt? I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. I really did. Linda had a complicated heart, and she'd spent most of her adult life trying to feel whole again. But Ethan wasn't a partner. He was a strategist. And my grandfather saw right through him. He's not interested in your mother, Grandpa told me, eyes fixed on the fire crackling in his study. He's interested in me. And when I'm gone, he'll be interested in you. Still, my mother kept defending him. You're being paranoid, Henry, she'd say, brushing off every concern. Ethan's trying. He just wants to help. Help. That word rang hollow every time she used it. Because Ethan wasn't helping. He was positioning. Watching. Listening. Learning. He started showing up earlier at events than anyone else, shaking hands, building relationships. He asked our legal team for a copy of the company's bylaws, claiming he wanted to understand how succession works in a family business. When the request was denied, he tried a different tactic, offering advice to junior employees, praising their ideas, suggesting they come to him if they had problems. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't accidental. It was a slow, quiet infiltration. The worst part? My mother let it happen. And when I confronted her, gently, carefully, she bristled like I'd insulted her intelligence. He loves me, she said, her voice sharp with finality. And unlike everyone else in this family, he actually listens. That's when I realized I wasn't just watching a man manipulate his way into power. I was watching him weaponize my mother's loneliness. September in Austin is still warm, but that night felt perfect. My grandfather insisted on hosting my 23rd birthday party at the family estate. He called it a small gathering, which in Henry Morgan's world meant catered cuisine, live jazz by the pool, and 50 guests in formal wear. I didn't want anything flashy, but he'd waved me off with a smile. You only turn 23 once, he said, and some moments deserve a little grandeur. I didn't know what he really meant by that, not yet. The garden was lit with golden lanterns strung across trees, and laughter floated over the sound of clinking glasses and music. Friends from college mingled with company executives. My mom was glowing in a silver gown, holding Ethan's arm like he was some Wall Street king. He wore a navy blue suit that probably cost more than my tuition and shook hands with every investor like he already belonged. From across the lawn, I watched him scan the crowd, not for me, not even for my mom, but for people with power. He zeroed in on Walter Kim, our chief strategist, and made a beeline with that salesman's smile. It wasn't a family celebration to him. It was a networking opportunity. I tried not to let it get to me. I greeted guests. I thanked my team from the R&D department for coming. But I couldn't shake the feeling something shifted. Like I was walking into a room where the picture frames had all been moved an inch to the left. Not wrong enough to scream, just wrong enough to feel. Then, at 9 o'clock sharp, I heard the gentle tap of a spoon against glass. My grandfather stood at the head of the patio, cane in one hand, champagne in the other. The crowd quieted instantly, not out of politeness, but out of respect. Henry Morgan didn't speak unless he had something to say. First, he said, "Let's wish my granddaughter a happy birthday." A round of applause and laughter. I smiled, embarrassed but warmed by it. Then he continued, voice steady, gaze fixed on me. "Avery has been the light of my life since she was born. After we lost her father, my son, she became not only a reason to keep going, but the reason to keep building." He paused. My chest tightened. "And tonight, I want to make an announcement. After nearly 5 decades at the helm of Morgan Systems, I'm officially stepping down." Murmurs spread like wildfire. I froze. He looked directly at me. "As of this evening, I'm transferring majority ownership and full executive authority of the company to Avery Morgan." The world tilted. For a moment, I didn't breathe. Then, applause, hesitant at first, then full, enthusiastic, and real. Old employees clapped. Some whistled. I caught eyes with James from finance, who gave me a thumbs up. But across the patio, Ethan's face cracked. His practiced smile collapsed under the weight of disbelief. My mother stood frozen, her champagne flute trembling. "I've prepared all the documents," Grandpa added. "My attorney is here. We just need Avery's signature." As I walked up, hands shaking, the truth hit me like a train. This wasn't just a gift. It was a declaration. A challenge. A warning shot. And from the look on Ethan's face, I knew this war was only beginning. The applause was still fading when my grandfather leaned in and whispered, "Sign quickly, while the air is still on your side." I did. His longtime attorney, Mr. Lawrence Hale, guided me through the paperwork, a thick, leather-bound portfolio of contracts, deeds, and authorizations. Each signature I placed felt surreal, like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life. But this wasn't pretend. With each pen stroke, I was sealing my place as the legal owner and CEO of Morgan Systems. And across the lawn, Ethan Caldwell was watching it all burn. The moment the final document clicked shut, the mood of the party shifted. There were smiles and congratulations, but beneath it, I could feel it, there was also tension. Ethan disappeared inside the house with my mother trailing behind, her face pale beneath the makeup. I should have left with Grandpa that night, but I didn't. I stayed to help clean up, to thank the staff, to linger in the afterglow of a night that should have been perfect. Instead, it was the last peaceful moment I would know for weeks. The next morning, I drove to headquarters early. I wanted to show the team that I was serious. But when I swiped my badge at the executive entrance, the scanner blinked red. Access denied. I tried again. Same result. The security guard, a new hire, barely looked at me before shaking his head. "Sorry, ma'am, I need clearance." "I am the clearance," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Call Susan Chin in R&D." He hesitated, then picked up the phone. 15 minutes later, Susan appeared in the lobby, confusion all over her face. "Avery? What the hell is going on?" We rode the elevator in silence until she pulled out her phone. "There was a memo this morning," she said, scrolling. "Sent company-wide, from Ethan Caldwell." I turned slowly toward her. "What did it say?" Her voice dropped to a whisper as she read aloud. "Effective immediately, Ethan Caldwell will act as interim CEO of Morgan Systems during the transition of leadership within the Morgan family. All executive decisions, strategic initiatives, and departmental operations will be reviewed and approved through his office pending board confirmation. I felt the floor drop out from under me. He'd moved fast, like a predator who had already sunk his teeth in. And worse, he knew the system. That phrase, pending board confirmation, was his loophole, his Trojan horse. It bought him time, influence, and access. He was gambling on the board's hesitation, hoping they'd rather follow a familiar-looking man in a suit than trust a 23-year-old woman, no matter what the document said. He's not even in the company, I snapped. He has no shares, no voting rights. Susan nodded grimly. That won't matter to some people. He's persuasive. And your mom is backing him. That's power. By mid-afternoon, an all-staff email from Ethan's assistant rolled out across the company. It listed Ethan's new office hours, his executive assistant's contact, and a note that all department leads were expected to report to him by end of week. He had moved into my office. My father's old office. And he had locked the door behind him. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a coup. And it had just begun. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom in my grandfather's estate, trying to figure out how everything had unraveled so fast. Less than 24 hours ago, I was handed a $120 million company. Now I was locked out of it, replaced, erased, by a man who didn't belong, and a mother who chose him over me. By sunrise, the ache had hardened into something sharper. Not rage. Not fear. Resolve. At exactly 7 a.m., I walked into the kitchen to find Grandpa already waiting. He wore a navy sport coat, not his usual robe and slippers look, and he was sipping black coffee like he'd been up all night too. You're early, he said without looking up. You knew this would happen, I replied. He gave the faintest smile. Of course I did. That's why I didn't just hand you the keys. I handed you a chessboard. He slid a thick manila folder across the table. Inside, documents, memos, photos, email printouts, even transcripts. What is this? I asked, flipping through. Insurance, he said. Or as I like to call it, Plan B. My grandfather, as it turns out, had been investigating Ethan Caldwell since the second week he started dating my mother. He talks too much, Grandpa said. And he thinks no one's listening. What he'd uncovered was worse than I imagined. Ethan had changed his name once before, from Evan Collier. That name was tied to 2 separate lawsuits in other states. Both women, wealthy widows, claimed emotional manipulation, financial abuse, and the sudden disappearance of funds right before divorce filings. And your mother doesn't know? I asked, stunned. She didn't want to know, Grandpa answered. That's her pattern. But that's not your fault. There were also screenshots of messages between Ethan and a venture capitalist tied to Rexacor, one of our most aggressive competitors. Ethan had hinted at a transfer of leadership and a window of opportunity coming soon. The dates matched up perfectly with his internal memo and the morning he took over my office. He wasn't just staging a takeover, he was lining up a potential sale. He thinks you're just a kid, Grandpa said. Someone with a fancy title and no teeth. I looked up from the folder. So let's show him what it feels like to get bitten. We spent the next few hours building our case. Grandpa called our in-house legal counsel, Martin Ross, a quiet but ruthless corporate attorney who had seen every type of power grab imaginable. Martin confirmed what Grandpa suspected: the ownership transfer documents included a dual consent clause. Meaning? Ethan couldn't make a single structural change, access company funds over $10,000, or reassign executive positions, without my and my grandfather's written approval. Which meant everything he'd done in the last 48 hours. It was smoke. Noise. Paper without ink. He can pretend to be in control, Martin said, but legally, he's not in charge of a damn thing. My fingers tightened around the folder. Ethan had underestimated the wrong person. And now, I had proof, legal leverage, and something more important, allies who actually believed in me. It was time to stop reacting. It was time to fight back. The boardroom at Morgan Systems had always intimidated me a little. 22 feet of polished mahogany table. Leather chairs spaced with precision. A skyline view of downtown Austin framed by floor-to-ceiling windows that made even the most seasoned executives sit up straighter. But when I stepped into that room at exactly 9 a.m., with Grandpa and Martin Ross on either side of me, I didn't feel small. I felt ready. Ethan was already there, seated confidently at the head of the table, my seat. My mother sat beside him, her lips pressed into a thin, unreadable line. Around the table were 12 board members, some old allies of my grandfather, some newer faces Ethan had spent the last few weeks trying to charm. He stood as we entered, all false politeness. Avery. Mr. Morgan. I wasn't sure you'd make it this morning. Grandpa gave him a measured smile. Son, I wouldn't miss this for the world. Ethan turned to the room, adopting his corporate tone. Ladies and gentlemen, we're gathered today to address recent leadership confusion. As interim CEO, I'd like to propose a formal resolution to streamline executive control during this transitional period. He passed out folders like a practiced salesman, full of jargon, fake urgency, and subtle power grabs. For the sake of stability, he added smoothly, I recommend that I continue overseeing daily operations while Avery gains more experience. The company's future depends on clear direction. A few board members nodded. He was good. I'll give him that. But it was my turn now. Before we vote on anything, I said, standing up, I think the board deserves the full picture. Martin slid our own folders down the table, heavier ones, thicker ones. I waited until the last member flipped it open before I spoke again. What you're holding, I said, is documentation linking Mr. Caldwell to multiple cases of financial abuse under a different name, Evan Collier. 2 women, 2 lawsuits, same pattern. Seduce, marry, manipulate, disappear. Ethan's smile faltered. Barely. But I saw it. There's also evidence, I continued, that he's been in contact with Rexacor executives, discussing insider access and potential asset sales. Those conversations occurred before my birthday, before I signed the ownership transfer. The room shifted. Eyes widened. Whispers started. That's a lie, Ethan snapped. Photos mean nothing. Anyone can fabricate screenshots. Then let's talk about the bylaws, Grandpa cut in, his voice calm but razor sharp. Clause 14C. No structural changes over $10,000, no role reassignments, no funding shifts, without dual signature. He turned to the group. He never had mine. Or hers. The boardroom fell silent. William Reynolds, the senior board chair, removed his glasses slowly. So you're telling us, this interim CEO role was never legitimate? Not even close, Martin said. It was theater. Susan Chin, our CTO, stood up. For the record, Mr. Caldwell accessed R&D databases without clearance. We flagged the behavior but assumed it was under Avery's direction. It wasn't, I said. And we have logs to prove it. That's when my mother spoke for the first time. Is it true? She asked Ethan, voice trembling. Did you lie to me about all of this? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was louder than any defense. Reynolds looked around the room. Unless there are objections, I move to recognize Avery Morgan as the rightful CEO, effective immediately. Every hand but one went up. It was done. I looked at Ethan as security entered behind him. His face had gone pale. This isn't over, he muttered. You think you've won? I stepped forward, calm and steady. No. I know I've won. Because I didn't steal anything. I earned it. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Ethan Caldwell was escorted out of the building that same afternoon. The man who tried to erase my future left through the service exit, shoulders hunched, suit wrinkled, threats still mumbling under his breath. But no one was listening anymore. He was done. And with him, a chapter of quiet manipulation and whispered schemes came to an end. What followed wasn't a celebration. It was triage. The damage he'd caused was deeper than anyone had realized. He'd frozen projects, rerouted communications, and attempted to rewrite entire leadership protocols within days. A few of our most cautious clients had already sent letters of concern, citing executive volatility and unclear ownership transition. Our competitors, especially Rexacor, were circling like sharks. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was awake. My first act as officially confirmed CEO was to hold a full company town hall. No PR spin. No sugarcoating. I stood in front of hundreds of employees and told the truth. You may have heard rumors, I said, microphone in hand, hands steady. Yes, there was an attempted power grab. Yes, my family was involved. And yes, we've handled it. Legally. Publicly. Decisively. I looked out over the crowd. Some skeptical. Some hopeful. This company is more than a last name. It's more than one man's vision or another man's ambition. Morgan Systems was built to protect people, to build the future, not to be sold off for personal gain. I'm here to protect that legacy. And I'm asking you to help me do it. The applause was cautious at first, then real. The next few weeks were grueling. I met with every department head personally. I reviewed every contract Ethan had touched. I sat through 14-hour days re-establishing trust with our partners and resetting the tone from the top. Grandpa stayed out of sight, honoring his retirement, but he checked in every night with a simple question, "You still standing?" I always answered the same way. Stronger today. As for my mother, she didn't leave with Ethan. She stayed. For a while, she avoided me, disappearing into guest rooms, whispering to the staff, drinking more wine than usual. But 3 days after the boardroom meeting, she knocked on my office door with tear-stained cheeks and a stack of documents in her hand. I had no idea, she whispered. I thought he loved me. I thought. She trailed off, unable to finish. I didn't say anything at first. I just let her sit in it, the silence, the shame, the self-inflicted wounds. I want to make it right, she said finally. I've filed for divorce. I'm giving back the settlement. And I'm staying in therapy this time. For real. It wasn't redemption. Not yet. But it was a start. I didn't hug her. I didn't cry. I just nodded and told her the truth. I'm not angry anymore, Mom. But trust has to be rebuilt. Slowly. She nodded. Then I'll earn it. That was enough for now. Back at the company, I made changes. I brought in diverse leadership. I created a new innovation task force. I opened internship programs for underrepresented students in tech, something Grandpa had always dreamed of but never had time to pursue. And little by little, the energy in the building shifted. Not just because I was in charge. But because I showed up. I stood firm. I listened. I acted. I wasn't just Henry Morgan's granddaughter anymore. I was CEO. And I was just getting started. 3 months later, I stood alone in my new office, watching the Texas sun dip behind the skyline. The space no longer felt like someone else's legacy. The furniture had changed. The wall art had been replaced. And on the shelf behind me stood a single photo, my grandfather shaking hands with my father in front of the original Morgan Systems building, a picture I'd seen 100 times growing up, but never fully understood. Now I did. This wasn't just a business. This was blood, time, grit. This was risk and reputation. This was trust earned and broken and rebuilt. My phone buzzed. A text from Grandpa. Your Q4 numbers look solid. Proud of you. You're leading. Not managing. I smiled. He still came by once a week, more often than he admitted. But these days, he kept to the background, reading quarterly reports with his glasses halfway down his nose, nodding with pride he pretended not to show. As for my mother, she was working on herself. Actually working. We weren't magically healed. Forgiveness isn't a light switch. But we talked. Weekly. Calmly. And most importantly, honestly. She was still fragile, like a stained glass window repaired with care, but this time, she wasn't pretending to be whole. She was trying. And I could live with that. Ethan? He was facing charges for attempted fraud and corporate espionage. According to Martin, his plea deal would likely mean a few years behind bars, followed by probation. Last I heard, he was still claiming he was set up. Let him. What mattered was that he couldn't touch us again. Not me. Not Grandpa. Not this company. And in the end, that's what this whole story has been about: protection, identity, and power. But not the kind of power Ethan understood. Real power isn't inherited. It isn't granted in a boardroom. It's proven, in the moments when everything feels like it's slipping away, and you choose to stand anyway. I used to think my biggest fear was not being taken seriously. Now I know, the real fear is becoming the kind of person who lets fear win. If you're listening to this, and you've been betrayed, by family, by friends, by people you trusted with your heart or your future, let me say this. You are not weak for being hurt. You are strong for surviving it. And if you're standing in the ashes of something you thought was solid, good. Because now you get to rebuild it, on your terms. My name is Avery Morgan. I'm 23 years old. I run a $120 million company. But more importantly, I know who I am. And I hope, wherever you are in your journey, you find that same clarity. Because titles fade. Money comes and goes. But self-respect? That's the one thing no one can steal, unless you hand it to them. And me? I don't hand anything over ever again.